So George, the first question to you, if you would allow us, is we've heard many things about IPOs of local companies, state-owned companies, corporates in Uzbekistan at the Toshkent Stock Exchange. So effectively, you're the person responsible for the exchange. What would be your views on challenges the companies are facing and prospects the companies have in raising capital at Toshkent Stock Exchange? Thank you.
Thank you, Jahan. Can everyone hear me? Is it working? Okay. Thank you, Jahan. Great question. I think that question is on everyone's mind. What I can say about upcoming IPOs, first of all, as some of you may know, there is a list of 40 companies, state-owned companies and banks, which are slated for privatization over the next few years. And of course, the big question is whether those IPOs will be successful. And every time when people ask me what's going to take to make these IPOs successful, I always reply that we need to always keep investors in mind. We need to put ourselves into shoes of an investor and think the way they think. And we need to always keep in mind that investors are investing in IPOs to make money. They need to make money. I mean, this is not a charity business, even though some people would maybe love it to be that way, but it's not a charity business. Everybody is here to make money, and the more money they make, the more successful IPO is, and it will lead to another IPO, predispositioned to be even more successful and so on. And likewise, if the IPO is not successful, then it's going to be harder to make next IPO successful. In order for IPO to be successful, the first and foremost is, of course, the quality of the issuer, the company. And especially if we are talking about state-owned entities and banks, number one priority, and Uzbekistan is no exception, we have seen that in Kazakhstan, in Russia, in Georgia, every country, number one is to ring-fence these companies from government intervention. If you are a bank, the last thing you want to have a government directing you which loan to give to whom at which terms. And you may end up lending to companies or individuals which are not bankable, really. And then what's going to happen, we all know, right? Then you will have to, this loan will not be repaid, then you will have to provision it, it's going to hit your bottom line, and it's not going to end well, right? If you are a state-owned company, non-bank, then again, you may not be the most efficient one because the government is asking you not to fire people due to social problems which it may cause, and therefore the company is overstaffed. So they can probably do the same job with half of the staff, but they simply cannot cut their workforce because again they have this social responsibility, and that is also understandable. I mean, I'm not criticizing the government. I say that these are real challenges which you have to take into account every time you are talking about privatizing state-owned companies. But since you asked the question, what's going to take to make IPO successful, these are the measures. So these companies, they may be state-owned still, but they need to be run as a private company. So ring-fenced from government's intervention, the government should look at them as a shareholder and say, look, do whatever is necessary to maximize my value as a shareholder. But I'm not going to tell you to whom to lend, how many people you should hire, in which projects you should be investing, etc., etc. So that's the best way to manage these state-owned companies. And then, of course, I'm pretty sure that management, the competent management, either it's already there or it can be brought in. There can be employee stock ownership plans, ESOPs introduced to incentivize management and the board to do the best and to basically align their interests with the interests of the shareholders. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, these are all measures which have been around for many, many years. We just need to follow the path, and I think it's going to make them, successful IPOs.
Thank you. So basically commerciality of business, yes, profitability of business, and operational autonomy when we speak about state-owned companies. Now the follow-up question on this one, if we have those companies in Uzbekistan and those terms are insured, would that be possible for foreign companies to basically enter Uzbekistan and invest in those companies through Toshkent Stock Exchange?
Certainly. I mean, Poland is the best example where Polish market thrived to such an extent that not only Polish companies got listed on the Warsaw Stock Exchange, but companies from Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, all the countries around Poland went to Warsaw. Why? Because the business follows the money. There was enough money, enough capital on the Warsaw Stock Exchange, and then you saw companies from various neighboring countries going to Warsaw Stock Exchange. Now, going back to your question, on Toshkent Stock Exchange, first of all, we want to make Toshkent Stock Exchange the exchange of choice for local issuers. That's number one. Before you pitch to companies from Kazakhstan, Russia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, you need to first make sure that local Uzbek companies see Toshkent Stock Exchange as the best place to place their shares or bonds, because they believe they will be able to sell those securities and raise money, raise capital at an affordable cost. And for that, we need definitely not only local investors, but also foreign investors. And one key aspect of bringing foreign investors to Uzbek local market is to open the custody link for Uzbek market. What some people may not realize is that it's much easier to buy a security in a foreign market than to hold it. Because for holding a security, you need to have a global custodian or ICSD such as Clearstream, Euroclear present in the country. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. And for that, we are working very hard with the help of the Ministry of Economy and Finance, with the help of the Central Bank. We are engaged actively with Clearstream. We are engaged actively with a couple of international custodian banks, global custodians, and hopefully within a year, we will have this link up and running. And then we will see a dramatic change in the environment, and the demand will go up, basically, when we have those big names present in Uzbekistan.
Thank you very much. I think we still will come back to the support of the government in development of capital markets. This is definitely one of the critical issues. And also we will touch upon custodian services. Yes, something that is happening in Uzbekistan already, but maybe not at the larger stage. The final question, George, to you at this stage. So now, let's think about global companies. Yes, Uzbekistani companies, developing, growing. Some of them have ambitions to issue the shares at exchanges outside of Toshkent. They look maybe at some banks in Georgia, yes, TBC Bank of Georgia, some banks in Kazakhstan, so they might dream at some point to have their shares listed at London Stock Exchange. Is it possible? Does it provide, again, briefly, any benefits to them? Is it achievable, in your view?
Sure. I mean, there are quite a few companies in Uzbekistan who can potentially IPO on the London Stock Exchange or maybe somewhere else. Their size is definitely the right one. I think whether they are ready or not for international IPO, that is a bigger question. And of course, listing requirements on the London Stock Exchange are much, much stricter than on Toshkent Stock Exchange or any exchange in the neighborhood. So you need to do a lot of homework, again, improving corporate governance, transparency, having a majority of independent supervisory board members in your board in order to qualify for listing. I mean, for example, Bank of Georgia, since you mentioned that, or TBC Bank, which are listed in the premium segment of the London Stock Exchange, they have to satisfy, among many, many criteria, the one that even the chairman of the supervisory board has to be independent, and let alone the majority have to be independent. And again, that is a little bit difficult at this moment to imagine happening with the state-owned companies in Uzbekistan, because I think states still thinks that they need to have a majority in the board in order to influence certain decisions. I think that mindset needs to change before these companies get ready for London. And just final thought that from the point of view of a policymaker, if I were the government of Uzbekistan or the regulator of Uzbek capital market, I would think not only about Uzbek companies tapping international markets and bringing money to the country from London. That is great, and probably it's going to be a very good thing for the shareholders of that company. But the bigger question is whether it's going to work and do any added value for the local market. If all the best companies from Uzbekistan get listed only in London, there is nothing left in Uzbekistan. There will be no trading, no brokers, no auditors, no evaluators. I mean, there will be this ecosystem which usually works around the capital market. That will never develop in Uzbekistan, and we want Uzbekistan to thrive. London Stock Exchange is a great exchange. with or without Uzbekistan. So we need Uzbek market to grow, and I think for that we need to first see local companies listed locally and then maybe internationally. That's what I would go for.
Thank you very much. So
Good morning, everyone. Bruno Valvanera, currently in the board of QQB Bank, before in Masaka, before EBRD. I have a follow-up question from the Economic Forum in this same venue in November with the presentation of Uzautomotors, which is currently the only IPO that has reached the market. I understand the number of shares that were placed was far below the expectation, and the price has gone down. In reflection, how do you assess this first IPO?
So I believe it's a question to
Maybe
George?
to George and...
You started. Then Odilbek is going to correct me if I deviate from the line.
Thank you.
Great question. Thank you, Bruno, for asking that. Look, I think Uzauto IPO was a good showcase how IPOs, what lessons to be learned from that IPO is that you need to be always very careful how you approach the market. You need to do your homework. You need to prepare really well for this IPO. And most importantly, you need to be ready to set the right price for the IPO. I think if we are talking about any drawbacks or lessons learned from that IPO, the number one would be that don't be too aggressive on pricing. Be cognizant of the fact that Uzbekistan is still a frontier market with all the inherent risks which are priced in every IPO or any bond offering. And you need to be cognizant of the fact that you just cannot sell a company out of Uzbekistan in this environment at the same valuation as a company from, I don't know, European Union. I mean, when investors were looking at price range of Uzautomotors, they were comparing the valuation in terms of multiples to Volkswagen, General Motors in the US, etc., and the big established names. And of course, I mean, they thought, at least the price reaction after the IPO can demonstrate that they thought that it was too pricey, too expensive. Again, I think management probably maybe should have listened to underwriters more carefully. Maybe they should have accepted a little bit bigger discount. As you rightfully mentioned, the stock price after IPO went down by 20%, then it's up a little bit, but it is still below the IPO price. And of course, we as a market, we don't like that because that creates a negative publicity. Then the next IPO, when it comes to the market, people will be more cautious, more conservative in their approaches. I think that's a lesson that we can learn from this IPO.
Thank you for the great presentation. I think I'll have a very quick question on capital markets. I think, George, you can take it. I mean, from investor perspective, our capital markets are still quite small, right? Especially to attract Western money. So is there any plan that Central Asian countries together, like SMU, like Capital Markets Union, being created? I think some of the post-Soviet countries, Baltic countries are doing a great job on this, creating this sort of Capital Markets Union to increase the ticket and list the index. Is there any plan? From a political perspective, yeah, President is doing a great job, like working with neighboring countries. A lot of unions are happening. From capital markets perspective.
Okay, so basically, are there any intentions to create any kind of regional platform?
Regional
Can
index.
you please introduce yourself, if you don't mind?
Nabi Togaev from Uzaman.
From Uzaman, yeah? Okay, so who would like to take that question?
Yeah, you can take it. Thank you.
I constantly get these questions, whether it's possible to integrate, Central Asian markets, Kazakhstan, maybe Tajikistan, Turkmenistan next to each, and Kyrgyzstan, of course. And yesterday I attended this great panel discussion about pan-Baltic capital markets, how they created basically one market in Baltic states. And you have NASDAQ OMX now running basically all three exchanges as one. And it doesn't make any difference whether you list on Tallinn Stock Exchange, Vilnius, or Riga. It's all the same. Well, it looks. I know it looks very attractive on paper, but it's much easier said than done. What helped Baltic states to have this to create this one market is the harmonization of their legislation. They are all EU countries, as you know, so all these EU directives regulating capital market, they apply there. So they basically harmonize their legislation and regulation to such an extent that it really doesn't make any difference whether you file a prospectus with the Estonian regulator, Latvian or Lithuanian. The procedure is the same, the listing requirements are the same, technology is of course one. And I always say that having one technology is the least of a problem, because these days technology is developed to such an extent that you can have one platform to trade securities, whether they are on KASE, Kazakhstan Stock Exchange, or Toshkent Stock Exchange, or anywhere else. That's less of an issue. The bigger issue is how do you harmonize these legislations, because these countries, Central Asia, even though they are neighbors, they don't have the same legislation, the same courts. Imagine you are a Kazakh company listed on the Toshkent Stock Exchange and something goes wrong and you are an investor who lost money. Where do you sue? Do you sue in Uzbekistan with the Uzbek court, or do you sue in Kazakhstan because it's a Kazakh company? So it's a lot of questions, again, because this industry is a heavily regulated industry. Regulation does matter a lot, actually. And you need to have a certainty as an investor about the environment in which you are operating, which listing rules you apply for, which court you go to if something goes wrong. If Kazakh law protects investments more than Uzbek law, then do you want to list on Kazakh exchange or here? Or there are lots of questions. So I think we're not there yet, frankly. I wish it was like in Baltic states, harmonization of legislations, but we're not there yet. And in the foreseeable future, to be very honest, I don't see prospect of these countries harmonizing their internal rules and regulations to such an extent which is going to make it possible to create one market, as you mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Tim Stubbs from Denton's law firm.
Sure.
It's been proven that good corporate governance has a very positive impact on Tobin's Q and on valuation of companies. As the head of the stock exchange said, you want to help people to make money. What is the stock exchange doing, and perhaps also in conjunction with the regulator, specifically to improve corporate governance of companies in Kazakhstan,
so you must,
or in Uzbekistan?
The most popular panelist today, George. All questions.
Look, we as a stock exchange, obviously we have a role to play, and we have listing rules which require, for example, minimum amount of free float, depending on the category. If you are at a premium category, you have to have a minimum 15%, 1.5 of a free float, which is a pretty decent hurdle for any local company. If you are in a standard listing, which is the next category, you should have at least 1% of free float. Plus, we require, actually, it's one of the requirements to have at least one independent board member. Of course, we can go as far as London Stock Exchange, requiring the majority of the supervisory board members to be independent, but we're cognizant of the fact that not every local company is mentally ready for that. So it's an evolution. You cannot jump from nothing to status of a developed market overnight. So you need to educate local companies and work with them to sort of explain them that having majority of independent board members is actually good. It's beneficial even for the founders of the company, because they can always demonstrate to investors that these companies manage on arm's length basis, and the owner does not always interfere in the management's decisions. So we do our part, but let's not forget that in addition to the stock exchange, there is also a regulator, and our powers are limited. Basically, maximum we can do is just to delist the company. But there are some companies who might not even care about that, if they are delisted or not, frankly. So I think that's where the regulator comes into play and says, look, this is something you cannot do or you should not do. For example, we've heard cases where joint stock companies announce dividends, basically promising investors that they would pay the dividends, then like a few months later they cancel dividends. Can you imagine? I mean, if you are an investor, you bought the stock hoping to get the dividend, and you were like expecting money coming into your account, and all of a sudden you hear that dividend is no longer going to be paid. So that's a wrong message, right, for the market, for the company, to investors. So I think we cannot do anything about that, unfortunately. So, but the regulator can certainly do something and say, look, this is unacceptable. If you announced a dividend, you should keep it and you should pay it. Things like that. So,
yeah.
I
I agree.